Okay. One final thought, and then we'll take a break. Anyone familiar with David Lee Roth? Show of hands. Yeah, I see a couple. So I want to read just a section from a book that was written, and they use him as an example. So Roth was the lead singer for Van Halen. Those of you who are old enough remember Van Halen from the mid-1970s to the mid-1980s, number of hits. 1984, his band Van Halen had over 100 concerts in 1 year. They were one of the first rock bands to bring major stage productions to smaller markets. Their production design was astonishingly complex, described by Roth as like a version of the Chinese Yellow Pages. So much equipment, so many human beings to make it function. And so while the band had their own road crew, much of the prep work when they got into a city had to be done in advance before their 18-wheelers arrived. Van Halen and the crew lived in fear that the venue's stagehands would screw up something and leave the band exposed to injury. But given the band's frantic touring schedule, there wasn't time to always do a top to bottom quality check at each venue. So the question was, how could the band know when they were at risk? During the same period of touring, excuse me, rumors circulated wildly about Van Halen's backstage antics. The band members were notorious partiers. Nothing strange about a rock band that likes to party, but they seemed committed to a level of decadence that was almost artistic. Quote, well, you've heard about throwing a television out a window. How about getting enough extension cords to make sure the television remained plugged in all the way to the ground floor? While the band's actions seemed less like playful mayhem and seemed more like egomania, the most egregious rumor about the band was its contract writer. This was written into their contract, demanded that a bowl of M&Ms had to be backstage with all the brown M&Ms removed. There were tales of Roth before the show walking backstage, spotting one brown M&M, freaking out, trashing the entire dressing room. Rumor was true. Roth actually bragged about it in his autobiography. The brown-free bowl of M&Ms became the perfect, appalling symbol of rock star diva behavior. Here was a rock band making absurd demands simply because they could. Well, get ready to reverse your perception. The band's M&M clause, that's what it was referred to, was written into the contract to serve a very specific purpose. It was called Article 126, and it read as follows, quote, there will be no brown M&Ms in the backstage area upon pain of forfeiture of the entire show with full compensation, unquote. The article was buried in the middle of countless technical specifications. So when Roth would arrive at a new venue, what do you think he would do every single time? He would immediately walk backstage and glance at the M&M bowl. If he saw one brown M&M, he would demand a line check of the entire production. Quote, guaranteed you will arrive at a technical error, unquote. They didn't read the contract. Sometimes it would threaten to destroy the entire show. In other words, David Lee Roth was no diva. He was an operations master. He needed a way to assess quickly whether the stagehands at each venue were paying attention. Had they read the contract and taken it seriously? He needed a way, in other words, to snap out of a mental autopilot and realize that his decision had to be made. In Van Halen's world, a brown M&M was a tripwire. A tripwire. A tripwire is an indication, an early indication of a future problem. Tripwire, early indication of a future problem. For David Lee Roth, it was a brown M&M in the bowl of M&Ms. So I want you to look back at your diagram one last time and identify what would be an example of a tripwire for this particular diagram. Why wait till the end to find out that we have failed? What would be an example of an early indicator of a future failure for this particular procedure? And if there's not one, what would that tripwire look like? What would be your example of the brown M&M in the bowl of M&Ms? Give you a second to think about that. Anyone have a good example of a tripwire in their diagram? Anyone?
In our case, the procedure is depositing checks that we receive from customers.
Okay.
It would be just the adding of all the total checks deposited in the bank versus showing the total amount deposited in QuickBooks or our accounting system. If they don't match, there you go. You're going to have a problem.
Comparing number to number versus waiting until the end of the month when you get your statement and finding out, whoops, we lost a check, a big check. Yes, great example. Great example. Tripwire. So I just want you to think about that and make sure as you're doing your design work, as you're doing the systems thinking, that in every diagram, every procedure, if possible, build a tripwire into that diagram, early indicator of a future problem. Okay.